Saturday, the 15th of January, 2022, and we're here in the context of your show, Carlos, your show at Tale of a Tub in Rotterdam, that you've titled Joined An Avalanche, Never to Be Alone Again. The show comprises a series of works that you have produced and worked roughly in the last 3 years, and that actually convey the different interests but also processes that you have been very intimately and intensively working on, namely the tensions between industrial processes or biological, scientific, and their point of conflict tension with organic processes or semi-organic processes, and how those in turn get to be instrumentalized or intertwined in different formats. We're going to actually have a conversation as in a wandering format through the different works. And I would like to actually start by discussing the film Wanderers. The film shows also another aspect of your work, which is linked to writing. In this film, the question of the poetic description and narrative of how actually the processes of self-replication, so the origin of life and how self-replicating cells from algae and from wet environments started to create complex patterns of evolution in which this cellular and biological information got distributed and circulated widely in many directions, in many forms, in many different matter entanglements, and how in turn through history we have been setting different boundaries, limits, forms of containing. No? How the same gestures or elements or similar can be found in different structures, in different material states and such.
What film allows you is to throw ideas and to edit ideas literally in a very open way. For example, a text that we have shared about the aggregates, like how we come from different entities combined.
This is a Lynn Margulis text.
Exactly.
Did sex emerge from cannibalism?
Exactly, and it's a beautiful text. It really connects very well with the movie, and the boundary of a cell, for example, can be related to a political boundary or to a physical boundary. In a moment where those concepts are very sensitive. No? In general, I like to intercept elements and intercept materials from already existing process, say natural processes, say industrial process, commodified processes. There's projects that are already started like 2013, 14, 15 that I finalize years after. I normally develop 5 to 8 projects at the same time. They take their own time, no? And there's always like the patience of following those processes is very, very important.
This would be the case of the work that we're standing nearby at the moment, Wet Blue, which is actually the first time that you have exhibited.
Yeah, this is the first time it's shown, yes.
And that, if I am correct, you've been developing since 2013.
Wet Blue is the title of the project. So the title comes actually from the tanning process, where there's in the bleaching process, which white leather is actually an aberration. No? There's this process of tanning, bleaching the leather to make it look white. It's a very contaminating industry, and they tan it with chemicals and with mercury, which has a slight blue tone. So even the impossibility of achieving that white is actually very meaningful. No? The hives, there's a full hives folded in 4. With the marks that they get in the industry to identify the quality or like the most desirable areas, no? But it starts to be a hierarchy of the use of the material somehow. No?
Also, as you have mentioned in the past regarding this work, is the question of abstraction that interests you. How from the body of a cow, the skin of the cow, there is this violent process of abstraction to actually maximize the profit of it.
Exactly. The market wants a car that smells like leather, but they don't want the real smell of leather. They want the abstraction of the leather smell that has been assimilated to luxury and to, so it's in a way it's funny how the image of that luxury is generated in its design is not by the material where it comes from. It's just by the desire that wants to be imposed in that format. No?
So this is A Strange Stranger, which is an incredibly interesting work to start diving and unpacking. What we see here are different industrial tubes that are then convolutedly entangled together, and which reminds us of what can be the interior of a gut, the meandering of a river.
This title, Strange Stranger, it connects quite well with the title of the show, Joined An Avalanche, Never to Be Alone Again, in that sense of by being born, like the elements that you're subscribing to and that you are physically joining, no? And that are not only belong to you, we were talking about borders and property before, no? Like the notion of property or of copyright or the notion identity exactly. It's just comes from conglomerates, as we were saying, no? Same as you were mentioning a meander or a gut structure, no? And the notion of biomimesis or biomimetics, where we observe one strategy happening in nature and we interpret it, to me is quite poor, and I would talk more about parallel dynamics, no? And strategies that are already existing, but that already existing within us as well, and maybe in that same way we're not replicating an exogenous, we're replicating an endogenous process, no? And this is in a very literal way this series of works that I have done in several places, mostly site-specific. That's in a way what they cover, no?
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it really connects to the idea of wandering, of how we're all aggregates and we were all wanderers once, and coming from a very, very diverse pool of ancestors, no, that are composing us, and how these ideas of property, interiority, genealogy are much more contaminated and promiscuous than we think. No? And then, of course, it would actually lead us to think what are the limits, or can we actually think of limits of a body, and what are the relations, for example, what do I share, what intimate relations do I share with this? With
the automotive industry, no? And the design, this element, for example, it's the design of it is I have no intervention, no? Like in this case, like how the smoke from this point has to arrive at the same time to this point as from here, no? So it's exactly how a meander works, no? It's exactly how a digestive system works. It's just a parallel way of distribution of labor, also, if you wanna call it in another scale, no? Shape of Thought is a project. It was a commission by a Spanish museum, Museo Universidad de Navarra. They have a very big photography collection, and the proposal is that you can do anything that you want around the collection. And so I decided to use the university as a tool. They have a very big scientific medical department. I was trying to first understand the physicality that allows the image to happen, no? And this series, Shape of Thought, specifically was using CAT scan to read the brain and read the physicality of how the image is processed in the brain.
But because the optical actually phenomena already happens
in the brain.
So people were looking at photographs, and you were scanning and monitoring their brain activities, and this is actually a translation through the volumetric output and activity of a scanner, but then again turned back into an image.
Turning back to an image where there hasn't been any optical intervention, no? And glass, relative states of matter, as you know, is very important in my work. Glass is a material that is not solid, not liquid. Is high. It has a high viscosity. So in that sense, like representing them in a totally abstract, unexistent background, an element that comes from the reading of that information in a material that's never stable. The format of this piece is like so. I mean, people can actually hold them because it's like one of the most surprising elements of this word is the lightest. No, so metal foam was invented by John Barnhart in the 60s, a German engineer, thinking that it could enhance the body, like being used as a prosthetic material. His brother had a hip problem, and he thought this could be used as a prosthesis. It never made it into the human body. On the other hand, has been used and still is used in spaceships, in high-speed trains, in luxury cars, because of the high density and the strength. No? But like something that was generated for its similarity to bone structure, but that it never happens to be used in human body. That was the trigger for me to use it. No. And this is a very specific way in which I normally use materials. I started to work with research institutions. This project I developed with the Fraunhofer Institute in Chemnitz, southeast Germany. So I asked for already existing researches that they were doing, and they had a mold of a motorbike tail, which is exactly, well, the ass of the person would come here, no? And so there was two rules that I couldn't mention the brand. Of course, that made the prototype that didn't progress, which is also has an evolutive, very Darwinian perspective, no? Like a prototype evolves or progresses or doesn't, no? It's just like a mutation. And in this case, it didn't progress, and that's why I could use it. So it's kind of detached from the function. And in that point, what I proposed was like learning how to use this material in the molds, and then how to bring it a bit more humanistic perspective, no? Which is part of the project that is not shown here. Was like intervening in the mold and letting it become this kind of more like
like kind of like monstrous, like working with the leftovers of the evolutionary industrial
exactly
way, right?
Yeah.
So working also in much more like monstrous outputs, or I remember that you were like actually doing holes, so really like deforming the original.
Yeah, making them like the pressure of the industry. Literally, the pressure of
the efficient, and
exactly
good looking.
Exactly, like the perfect performance of the mold is generated to make the functional piece, and what I'm interested is in the defect, but also like the where the industrial process becomes more fragile and it becomes more human and becomes more empathic somehow.
I'm also, from a more comprehensive point of view, I'm interested in actually discussing the aesthetic allure and the aesthetic form of your work, which is, I think sometimes when we get like very much into the scientific and the industrial and the production processes that are behind it, we actually lose touch with this also common thread to all of the works, which is this mesmerizing form that they end up doing, no? How this mesmerizing forms that actually are the result of errors, or as we said before, discards. This is especially also evident in Hiatus, which probably is the most also breathtaking installation in Tale of a Tub, in which the pillars of the old bathhouse have its replicas, no? And there's long aluminium columns, which at moments have these crevices or ripples, and even the breaks, no?
When you get an invitation for a show, you mostly see what the space talks to the work and what can the work contribute to the space. No? And in this case, it was kind of like automatic for me that I really like the space. Outside and inside is a very specific space. I wanted to respect it in a way, like to bring a very minimal intervention, but it would be meaningful on its own. No? In the end, when we generate an object, that is the only interaction between the spectator and me. I mean, in the end, it's the only element of conversation when I'm not there to talk about it. No?
Yeah, definitely. And sensuality is something also that is very grounded in a material perspective of life.
Yeah, these ones, they're very sensual, it's true. Not that I don't try to avoid it, but it happens, no?
And I like very much, again, because it connects with muscle memory, the points of vulnerability, the points of stress, the points of actually breaking. What is the process of hiatus?
These are the profiles from a new electric taxi that's being made for London. This is where I push the material to, no? But I find some feature and then I realize, then they tell me what it is for.
So there's also the sensuality of the material speaking to you as
yes,
a point
absolutely.
As a point of origin of this project,
like
and I guess also the other projects.
Exactly. It's a bit like a peacock talking to me through the internet, and I'm ooh, what is this? And so that's the point with them was like the contradiction between extrusion and hydraulic press. That's what really attracted me from a conceptual point of view, but like aesthetically, its nature is clear. No? So they're made by Hydro. Hydro is the biggest aluminum multinational in the world, and they have factories all over the world. And they said, well, we have one in Irurzun, in Navarra.
Okay.
And I said, I pass by Navarra to see my family very often. No? The profiles, the straight part, they're made by extrusion, so exactly like a churro. Like a extrusion is like you put like in a cold process, you put a piece of metal and you give it a shape. Mm-hmm. And then in order to have a stress test to the material, because later it's going to be crushed in an accident, to know what are the weaknesses of this material, they put it on a hydraulic press. And this is exactly what happens in the factory and what's happening here. Like these works, they could come, they come from a stream of production from an industrial environment. They exist in the art space, and they could go back to that flow of material. They could be melted again.
I would like to expand further this idea of secretions. That is a way you approach to understand not only your practice, but artistic practice in general. No? How basically the production of artworks is part of a longer chain of production in which these are secretions akin to feces, mucus, or any other actually organic material that actually needs to be secreted out as an end or as a side effect of a process. Mm-hmm. But that actually the producing forces that are behind it are much larger, have other scales, other tempers, and other temporalities, which these are just like the residues or the traces of it. Can you maybe elaborate more on that?
Yeah. First, because it's involuntary. I mean, if you try to suicide by not breathing, it's just not gonna be able, because nature has given you a rhythm of existing that you don't control. No. So I like to think of artistic practice as something like that. You cannot contain shit. You literally cannot at your disposal. We are culturally taught, but like nature, it's going to happen. And I like to approach artistic practice and in that way, as something you do it because you do it. And don't ask me. I make a living and I lose all of my time and all of my energy. It's just something you don't consider. No? So artistic practice as a way of existing in the world, it has this relationship with the secretion that you mentioned.
So jumping from this last reflection, there is the question of distributed agency, which I think it's a vector that is very present in the multi-layered and of your work, no? In how natural and organic processes evolve, then replicate into the industrial or artificial formats, from also how you approach artistic practice, what is your level of intervention, and how in turn you actually understand this into a wider system of complex relationships. No? I think this is very important to connect it to the title of the show and the intention that is behind it. Join an avalanche, never to be alone again. How can we stay, let's say in Harawaian terms, no? Stay with the trouble, stay with the complexity of all these entanglements, exchanges, relations and formalizations, and try to avoid any form of reduction or reductivist perspective on them, but actually to lure and thrive on these more promiscuous, contaminating and complex exchanges. The exhibition has, in a way, a human or a body structure.
Yeah, I wouldn't have identified, but it's true.
In which we can have like the brain and the brain activity images with shape of thought, the different pillars that can be from the structuring bones, no, with also the muscle memory reference in bone marrow, whereas in the basement there is also like the more unconscious and more subterranean activity. The show has also been closed to the public for the last weeks of the lockdown, so this conversation will live and resonate, no? In the same way the echoes in the different practices, in the different works, in the different gestures, in the different cracks and crevices are also echoing here.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Carlos.
Yeah, thanks to you.